have here a 2011 MacBook Pro 15-inch. Normally don't service Macs. They're always a headache in one way or another, but this was for a buddy of mine and had something to do with a project he's working on with the client, and wanted to lend him a hand as best I could. And as if working on Macs wasn't hard enough, imagine trying to service modern operating systems with El Capitan. It's not easy. So my tools are limited, but we needed to get some data off of this, so I thought, why not give it a shot? Linux is usually pretty good at recovering data from something like this. Windows, it's another story. Windows can be typically pretty hard to get any sort of successful data recovery out of a Mac. It's possible, but it's generally harder. So this machine came to me with two issues, both of which I have somewhat fixed. The first issue is that the hard drive inside was failing. This means that it would periodically not detect the drive, it would periodically kernel panic on boot, and I have solved that issue with a replacement drive and a cloned image of the user's drive. I took a few attempts, but I did successfully block for block copy the entire drive. The cloned drive seems to not boot, but the data is accessible, and that's what's really important. All the data was transferred, and it seems to all be legible, readable by the Mac now. The second issue with this machine, and again, part of the reason why A, I don't service machines usually that are this old, and B, I don't service Macs, is this machine has a classic case of dead GPU. So occasionally I would boot the machine, all would go well, I get to desktop. It would look a little strange, but otherwise would work just fine. And then all of a sudden, I wouldn't get that. All I would get is a white screen. Just a blank white screen after initial loading. And that, I learned, was because when a MacBook 15-inch with a dedicated GPU, I shouldn't say all, but at least this particular model, boots, it immediately switches over to the dedicated GPU for the initial boot sequence, right where that verbose would have ended. This is the part that would have switched over to the dedicated GPU. And at that point, the dedicated GPU is not able to properly display what we're looking at here, and we would not get any further than this. Obviously, that is not what we're seeing today, so I found a workaround. Unfortunately, this does not mean that I repaired the dedicated GPU. That is next to impossible to do for a machine of this age with this problem, but I was able to convince the machine to essentially ignore its dedicated GPU and instead boot with the Intel integrated display driver, which you should see here, Intel HD Graphics 3000. So that is what the machine now uses exclusively. You might have also noticed during the boot up sequence that it was booting in verbose mode. That was just a diagnostic step that could technically be turned off, but we're going to leave it there to indicate that this machine probably isn't working right to the average Mac user. Just as a good word of warning that you probably shouldn't mess with it if it's working. Whether people will listen to that call sign or not, who knows, but it'll certainly make it look scarier. It's working, everything is working, the performance is pretty good on this version with this particular machine's age. It's, like I said, it's from 2011, 2.2 gigahertz Core i7. It's one of the lowest end model 15-inch Macs they made. This one came with an AMD GPU, dedicated GPU. The exact model I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's kind of irrelevant now that it's dead. It wasn't a powerhouse at the time anyway, but it sure did put out a lot of heat. So there was an Apple recall program for this particular model of MacBook. For up until 2017, I believe, you could send this Mac in to an Apple dealer and essentially get them to fix it for you by replacing the main board with another board with the same problem. Some people are convinced that in 2017 they came up with a second generation of the GPU in this machine, which fixed the issue. This is just not true. They're not going to be making a 6000 series AMD mobile chip in 2017. That came out in 2011, 2012. production just doesn't work that way. There is no second generation chip. It's just if you got your machine repaired at a later date. These machines usually take between 4 to 7 years, give or take, by some estimates, to fail. Which, after that point of time, without properly maintaining them, which most Apple users do not do, they will bite the dust from heat death. Now, the actual cause of this heat death is speculative. Some people believe it's the GPU die itself. GPUs, especially flip chip GPUs, they have traces within them. These traces are extremely small and therefore are also sensitive to heat. Constant heating and cooling cycles that are very common in this Mac or in many computers and in many mobile GPUs from this era, regardless of whether or not they were in Apple machines, were usually subject to this issue where after enough heating and cooling cycles over a long enough time period, these layers, or these traces rather, would raise and drop, raise and drop, raise and drop. And because the way they interconnected was using a bump, essentially, where two sections in the middle of these traces were raised, they would raise and drop, 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 until they eventually kind of became separated. And now at that point, you start to have failing GPU issues. So what a lot of repairs of this issue actually are, like third-party repairs, some of them are legitimate repairs where they take the chip off, properly reball a new chip. Again, you can't get flip chip design package GPUs directly from any suppliers. They're going to be salvaged GPUs that are reballed and then placed on the board and hopefully put in place with a proper temperature, proper flux, proper cleaning, all this stuff. There are professionals out there who do this sort of work with proper board preheating, all the precautions you should take when attempting this sort of repair. But at that point, the repair is going to be relatively expensive. Usually you'll be looking around $400 or $500, maybe even more, to get that sort of repair done. And at the end of the day, you're going to be replacing the chip with the same chip that has the problem. So it's not usually a worthwhile endeavor. Then you've got the eBay repair option, which is usually people asking between $100 and $200 on eBay to do this procedure. Again, replace your GPU. They're going to do it with the same GPU. Again, they're probably sourcing them from even a sketchier source than professional repair stores will be. And furthermore, to make matters worse, usually what that cheap repair is going to be, if you're lucky, is an ape with a heat gun blasting the chip off of your board, probably melting shit in the process, and if not melting shit, definitely burning the board, definitely just not a good idea. Heat gunning the board with basically an untemperature controlled 500, 400 degree heat gun to get the chip off. They'll clean it up, hopefully, with a soldering iron, maybe not, who knows, and then they'll drop on a replacement chip and heat gun it back on. So that is not a very good repair because it leads us into the third and final and usually cheapest and usually sketchiest repair option for this dead GPU, and that is when someone takes it, puts it in a toaster oven at 230 degrees, which they claim will be reballing the GPU, which unfortunately, lead-free solder in a MacBook like this is not going to be melted or reballed at those sorts of temperatures. But anyway, they're going to heat shock the GPU. Remember that raise fall thing I was talking about with my two fingers? That was a really, really dumb and stupid... Anyway, you remember that? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to heat shock the GPU by leaving it in an oven for 200 degrees, or in the case of the guy with the heat gun, 400 degrees, whatever, for a really long period of time. They're going to heat shock those layers back together. And then the same thing's going to happen again, except in rapid succession. On the micro scale, it's essentially two glued, if you want to think of it that way, layers separating. So all you've done by heat shocking it is force those layers up into each other, but they're going to experience the same degradation just extremely quickly now because heating cooling cycles are what caused the problem, and all you did is just fucking heated the shit out of it. So yeah, if that repair does end up working for you, it's not going to last. It might last anywhere from a week, a day, an hour, a year. It could last a year, but eventually it's not a real repair, right? Like I said, this is a virtually impossible to repair issue because it's an issue with the cooling system in the MacBook. It's just not powerful enough for the chip that's in it. And even though you can run it hot and probably baby one of these for a really long time, as a matter of fact, I know that there are MacBooks of this exact model with this exact GPU that are still fully functional today. The way users have gotten that to happen is by maintaining their machine properly, keeping the heat sinks clear of dust and debris, keeping the thermal paste properly applied, 1, and fresh, 2, so that the machine doesn't thermal throttle, and not running extremely heavy GPU-bound workloads like video renders. Or, if they do decide to do that, it's honestly not a bad idea to preheat the GPU in some way by slowly running a graphic-intensive task like, say, 4K video playback for a little tiny bit of time, just to get it warmed up beyond the 60-70 degree mark, and leave it there for about 5-10 minutes so that it's already pre-warmed, and then you run your video render. And again, trying to keep it as short as possible. Basically, don't beat the shit out of it, because, again, this thing, when it's running a GPU-intensive task, is going to hit thermal throttling point for the GPU, which I think for this particular era of AMD is we're actually around 85C. This thing will easily touch 90, even with all of that proper maintenance. So, yeah, basically, if you baby it and you take care of it, there's a chance that it can last for a long time. But most people don't use their computers like that. They'll use them on their bed. They'll render 2-hour videos. They'll never dust the thing. They'll never clean the thing. They'll never repaste the thing because, again, these are a bitch to take apart no matter what year and model Mac you're talking about. So this machine will never have a working dedicated GPU again. The software patch can be undone by updates, which means it has to be redone. So it's never going to be a work machine again. But as a throw-around Mac, it's fine. It's good. The battery's a little worn in, as to be expected of a 10-year-old computer, but, it's at 77%. I know you can't see that from here, but it actually lasts a little bit of time, about as good as my gaming laptop, which for a 11-year-old computer is darn impressive. Other things we did to this are we got SMC fan control so that we can have a little bit more granular control of the fans to hopefully help with that cooling issue. I have not repasted the machine as of yet. I'm waiting to hear back on the customer on what they intend to do with the machine. If they intend to keep it, probably not going to delve deeper into this machine, just because I know it's limping as it is. It runs okay. It's 42C at idle. It'll climb up to your 70s or whatever when watching YouTube playback. That's really all this machine should ever be used for at this point. So, that's not great. But even if we repasted it, it's probably not going to get much better. How much effort and how much of my customers' time and money am I willing to invest in a machine from 2011? It's not worth it. However, an option has been given to the customer, seeing as we did some data recovery, we've done some investigative research into this issue. There's basically 2 options. Option 1, take the data, leave the machine and go for the customers. If they want to trade the machine for the service, I'm open to that. As cool as this 2008 MacBook is, and as much as I will never get rid of it, it's not exactly good as a service tool anymore. This, however, would be perfect. It's not going to be good for a professional to use anymore, but for someone like me who just needs it to, make Mac compatible flash drive, download new Mac OS operating systems, code a kernel extension or something of that nature, make edits to a kernel extension, just little non-intense, but you need a Mac to do functions. This is great. I mean, it's got a great display. That's another issue with the dead GPU. External displays rely on the dedicated GPU, not the internal GPU, or integral GPU, excuse me. So unfortunately, this machine will never be able to display out ever again. That function just can't work at the same time as the Intel GPU, so it is stuck with the internal display as the only display option. So yeah, that's about it. Nothing to write home about, but I do like this computer. I really do. This era of design, like this thicker MacBook, we still got the MagSafe, we still got normal everyday human port spec here, we still got dual audio interfaces, we still got the little the battery charging indicator button down here. that cool little light up feature that shows you your battery capacity. It's got all those little cool dealios that slowly over time MacBooks started shedding away in the name of Type C, I guess. So anyway, the standby light as well. They started making these smaller and harder to see as they went down the stack, because Type C, I guess. Thinner, worse cooling solutions, more defects, more recalls. For these machines' problems, which there are many, they do the 13-inch. If you can find the 13-inch 2013s or 13-inch 2012s or 2011s, they're probably one of the most solid Mac computers ever made. They do have one defect that's common among all of them, which is the SATA cable. Sometimes that SATA cable, that little wiry ribbon SATA cable that Apple was using in this era, apparently those can fail quite frequently. But, just overall, they're very simple. They're very easy to take apart and keep maintained. Their processors may not be hot shit anymore, but they can still at least run, I think, High Sierra. So as far as a reliable work machine goes, and you need to have macOS, that's where I would look at if you don't need a whole lot of performance. If you do, I don't even know what you should buy a Mac Mini. They're the most indestructible Apple computers that you can get because they're probably the simplest. It seems whenever Apple tries to get a keyboard or a screen or a Wi-Fi chipset involved, where it has to go through a display, shit gets hairy for whatever reason. But anyway, yeah, that's that. Anything else I should point out? Oh yeah, one last little thing, which is going to be a little hard to demonstrate because it's sort of the absence of it that is the issue. The backlight is shit. The backlight is something, I don't know if it's water damage or if just the amount of grit and grime that was on this thing when I got it. I don't know why the backlight is so uneven. It's present. I can see that every key is lit up. The camera might not pick that out so well, but every key does have its light. It's just, it shines through much better here than it does anywhere else. And it doesn't look like the other keys are dimmer. It could be, but it looks like to me more that the other keys are just dirtier. It's not surface dirt. I cleaned this off very well. It's just underneath the keycap. I think there's just grit and stain under the cap from being pressed in with all that gunk for so long. I think. Maybe. It could also just be, that the backlight has faded in some areas and stayed vibrant in others just through natural wear. It's hard to say. As not being the primary owner of this machine. It makes beeps. It makes bops. Speakers still sound great. That's another nice thing about Macs in this era. They had full subwoofers, pretty big speakers, so when it comes to playing sound, they actually, for a laptop, sound pretty good. They're not bad. Maybe a little bass heavy, I'm not sure, but they definitely don't sound awful, and they definitely don't look awful either. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say about this one. Like I said, I'm still waiting to hear what the customer decides to do with it. If they want to take it back, it'll be some money. If they want to take it back with upgrades that I put into it, and the hard drive that I put into it, it'll be a little bit more money. If they decide that they'd rather just leave it with me, then it will be a service machine for me. Hopefully help me take on a few more Macs in the future. So, yep, it's kind of just up in their hands. Like I said, if they do decide to leave it with me, you might see another video on this one in the future where I take it apart, maybe finally get an excuse for an ultrasonic cleaner or something to clean up the motherboard because it's still pretty dirty. Maybe I'll just do the old distilled water alcohol method. It's not that dirty. I could certainly get away with doing that with a light soft bristle toothbrush or something to move around the dirt. But yeah, who knows how far I'll decide to take this one if I do end up with it in my possession. So, yeah, I guess that's it for now, and keep an eye out for more on it.